You can go.
We don't need to wait for it to.
No, it started. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'd like to call the meeting of the Community Finance Committee to order on October 18th at 6:45 p.m. This is the call roll for us, please.
Mr. Anderson,
Here.
Ms. Cleveland, present. Mr. Komsky,
Here.
Mr. Davis,
Here.
Ms. Guerrero, Mr. Henry, Mr. Einhoff,
Here.
Dr. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Kohler,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Ms. Sedor. Here.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for our last meeting, August 16th, 2022. Does anyone have any questions or corrections to the minutes? And if not, could I have a motion? So move. Second.
Second.
Thank you both. We voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The next portion of the agenda is public comment. I know I saw an email this afternoon, one piece of written comment that'll go into the record. Do we have any others that went?
We have one via Zoom. There's Monica Sheehan.
Oh,
Good evening.
Good evening, Ms. Sheehan. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. You can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm Monica Sheehan. My comment concerns agenda items 6B, C, D, and E. First, regarding 6B, the Faculty Senate contract. There have been conflicting statements regarding its average annual percentage increase. The 8/29/22 board highlight email stated it as 4%, while a 9/7/22 Wednesday Journal story reported it as 3.5%. In tonight's discussion, please clarify which is correct, a 3.5% or 4% average increase for each of the 4 years of the teacher's contract. Second, agenda item 6C, levy options. According to a memo in the 9/8/22 Committee of the Whole meeting, agenda item 8A, it states that, quote, the district expects to generate an annual surplus between $6 million and $10 million for the next 3 years that could be devoted to future capital projects, end quote. Based on this memo, the expected levy increase is too high. It's time to right-size the cash reserve, not add to it. It's intended to serve as a rainy day fund to cover funding delays. It's not intended to serve as a fund for the board to finance capital projects without voter approval. I urge you to recommend that D200 levy only for what it needs, rather than levy to stockpile more excess taxpayer dollars in the cash reserve. Third, and relatedly, agenda item 6D, debt policy. The fund balance or cash reserve policy should be updated to reflect the school's actual needs of a rainy day fund. Since the policy was last reviewed in 2015, there have only been 2 years in which the cash reserve has been needed to cover funding delays, this year and last year during the pandemic. Approximately $33 million was needed to cover the county's delays in the sending of its tax bills. There have been no delays in state or federal funding. Lastly, regarding 6E, Project 2, I urge you to recommend that funding for Imagine's Project 2 go on the ballot for voters' approval. It would be undemocratic and unethical for just 7 voters to decide funding on a controversial major capital project such as Project 2. There are more than 48,000 registered voters in District 200, and they have made it clear that they want to decide where their money is spent. In 2015, voters forced D200's non-referendum bonds on the ballot to fund a $37.5 million Olympic-sized pool. And in 2020, of the more than 31,000 votes cast, 76% of Oak Park voters voted for an advisory referendum that major capital projects exceeding $5 million go on the ballot for voters' approval. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. No other public comment?
That concludes the public comments, except for the one that you guys received earlier today from Ms. Alexander.
Thank you. Next agenda item, or discussion items, starting with number 5A. The first item I wanted to revisit was the committee's charge. So we included the original memo to the board from last summer, 2021, that created the committee and its structure. Just kind of wanted to talk through the areas that we were charged to investigate. I feel like we're doing a good job of hitting a lot of those items, including projections, budgeting, comparable data, policies, and a number of other things that are kind of on our agenda for later points in the fiscal year, like reviewing the audit, investments, and other sorts of things. The piece I want to focus on that second page at the end of the charge bullet points. The second to last bullet is that the CFC will provide the board with a brief quarterly written report on any material issues, trends, and input based on items reviewed. And then the last bullet point is that the CFC chair will provide an annual written report and will make a presentation to the board summarizing the CFC's activities. So I want to apologize for the fact that we haven't really done either of those yet, and want to give a little clarity. We have Tom on the Zoom, Cabrini is not here, but I'd like Tom's opinion and Greg's as well, sort of what the expectations are, kind of what the board was envisioning maybe in the conversation about this group on the difference between the quarterly report and the annual report. And I guess also defining, are we talking about a calendar year versus a fiscal year, and just trying to identify sort of when we need to start this process and how we do that as a group going forward, how we coalesce our ideas into the boards. So and maybe start with the administration or the board's thoughts on that, and then as the community side of the committee, we can talk about, you know, how we put that together.
Tom, do you want to take the lead on that, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, excuse me. I'll take the lead because it fits in discussions we're having with the board. You know, there's the CFC. We have a whole spectrum of other committees and then liaison roles, and we're reevaluating and looking at all that to find out what the best way of assuring that the board is informed of what is happening at all of those levels. So now bringing it to the CFC, and we talked about CFC. You know, your questions. So on a monthly basis, we will be having a segment of the board meeting geared to committee updates. So if the CFC has met between periods, we will, you know, making sure that there is an update. That update will be provided by the board members who are involved in those committees, just to kind of make sure the board is kept abreast. So that's on a monthly basis. Going to what's in the document here, in terms of quarterly and annual, you know, nothing was set. I think it's kind of maybe an omission of whether that is calendar year or fiscal year. We can make a decision. I think a calendar year works fine, but I'm, you know, of having the annual report, it kind of fits in line with the levy year. So I would kind of say do it every December, and we can make that specific if people feel strongly another way. Greg, I don't know from an administrative standpoint on that one. And then
that was sort of what I was thinking, only in the sense that we started in January or February, and we're now getting close to that, you know, end of our first year mark. But if it makes more sense to do one now and then come back again in 6 months at the fiscal year break, we can certainly do that too.
So we answered that question. Your second question, Steve, was the difference, and I'm trying to look at that at the same time I'm looking at you. So a brief, the brief quarterly report, I guess the original thinking was that this committee would be meeting roughly quarterly, okay? But we've had some discussions that say, the timing of that, it might be more than once a quarter during certain times of the year. So I don't think we've kind of finalized that frequency. And so I just think that written report just needs to be a brief summation that can go into our notes, to which I will report to, or someone from the board will report to other board members. Does that make sense?
So would it really be providing the same information that you're providing in your oral report?
Yes, the oral report, and the oral report will be just to kind of talk to these key points of what was what was discussed. Yeah, the oral is just, so that there's opportunity for questions and discussion. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Anyone have questions on that? Anyone have questions or concerns on any piece of kind of our charge, what we're to be looking at and how we're sharing that information out to the school board? Then the next agenda item B is the faculty senate contract updates. Cindy, were you gonna take that, or was it Tom, you're gonna take that?
I guess I'm winning that one.
That's great.
Okay, and I'm trying to think of when we last updated, so I'm going to assume that I'm just getting my.
Our last meeting was in August when negotiations were still in progress.
Okay, yeah, we were kind of just settling up the final pieces, so I'm not going to go through all of the history of things unless people have questions. I'm going to focus.
I was mostly wanting this as an agenda item to hit on any key financial points. If you could clarify Ms. Sheehan's question about the average increases and then any other significant changes from a financial perspective as it relates to compensation benefits and then retirement and the like, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I will address all of those. Okay, so I think the main kind of recap of the negotiations were there were no changes made in any retirement benefits or health insurance in the contract. There were some health insurance issues that are handled well outside of it by the committee. The main area of impact was in salary in the contract. There was 4 years ago, we actually negotiated a contract that removed or got out of a traditional step and lane structure that went into just a flat increase. In this contract, we returned to a step and lane, a step structure with all that was a kind of a key ask or give to the faculty in the name of assuring that the total increase that we got would be able to live within the incremental dollars we could levy. The net increase in just the salary schedule. So the problem when we're reporting all of this is you've got salary schedule and you've got other smaller cost benefits. So I'm focusing on the salary schedule, also including in there retirements, et cetera. The net increase over a 4-year period equated to a 14.9% increase, which on an annual basis, if it were flat, equates to 3.5% per year. It varies year to year. It's a little bit front end heavy because of, you know, what we were seeing in the inflationary climate, with a little bit more in the first year. If you look at the contract itself, it shows 2.5% plus step in year one, and then 1.3% plus step in years 2, years 3, and years 4, which when you put it through with all the other conditions of changes in lanes and projected retirements, that magic answer is 3.5%. I think that covers it high level, and I'd welcome any questions if I've missed something.
Anyone have questions? Could you state those new base increases again real quickly, please, Tom?
In the contract,
Yeah,
and please, yeah, I'm not looking at it, but so in the first year, the schedule was reshaped, okay, which was, there was some changes in it, and a 2.5%, and I'm looking for someone, Cindy, is that, in my mind, I have 2.5%. I can make sure I look it up. I don't have that. And I know years 2, 3, and 4 were each at 1.3%. Okay. Let me be factual correct and check. I'm gonna just to get that number, just so that there's no confusion, because I have 2.5% in my mind. I don't have a spreadsheet open, and I want to make sure we're right.
So to the other piece of that, with the steps, you didn't just bring back the old schedule with the old steps.
Correct.
Completely reformatted schedule.
Yeah, the old schedule was a step schedule from the beginning, initial contract dating to 1998. It had some pretty big steps that were in the vicinity of like $3,500, $3,400 to $3,500. It had some smaller ones. It kind of was somewhat, there were a little few places where it was a little bit erratic, but we put in a flat value step for each one of the lanes, and it's in the contract, and those steps are, and again, I'm going from memory without having the contract in front of me, but in my mind, it was $2,400, $2,800, and $2,900 per year, depending on the lane you're in. I'm saying that from memory, and need to have those exact dollar values validated.
It's online, and I hope to take a look.
It is online.
Yeah,
Everything.
I had a chance to.
Yeah, everything I'm saying is based on an online, you know, on the published document. So I'm except for that 3.5% average, because that gets into, you know, applying that schedule to our people. Okay.
That's the real world impact to the
real world, yeah, the
financial projections.
The impact to the district is that
actual staff at actual spots on the schedule and moving through it. Yep. Any other questions for Tom?
and I'm now, I have my spreadsheet. The formal increase in addition to the restructure is 2% in year one, 1.3, 1.3, 1.3. So I was wrong with my gut. I had a different number in my head, but I'm now, I stand, that's the right number. Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, or concerns on this agenda item.
Just, is there a way to see that calculation, how you do it? Just because me, the, like, I can see the steps lanes, that's great, but which means nothing to me, like, is there like oh yeah, like 15 retirements this year? This is like a summary total, I'm not saying, you know, people, but like $1 million a year is gonna retire out this year, we're assuming that we're rehiring it, you know, but, yeah, so we have like something like that that we can see. At ever any point, I don't know, I assume you guys have a calc that gets you to that, because Tom's gonna be mentioning numbers. Just because me as like a public person, all I can see is that's range, which I guess like if I poll the teacher's salaries, and I can figure out how long they've been here for, I can figure that out, but.
Be a lot of trouble.
Somebody else already does it.
Someone took it, yeah, is there a way to see that?
Yeah, we modeled that out throughout
Okay.
the process. Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, so normally what happens when somebody's retired and they're on a retirement track, that amounts get added in, but as they retire, then they, you know, the next person who gets hired is gonna come in at a lower scale, and, we hire at, MA5 is the highest stuff that we've got. Supposed to be.
But
But they'll have everyone plotted on a schedule of how many FTE are in each cell, making each amount, and they'll move down a step to the next year, and so all that goes into the
That's, yeah,
calculation.
around,
So-
for that.
We know when folks are gonna retire well in advance, because of how the retirement model works, what we don't know is exactly who we're gonna hire. So we have a standard assumption that we go into.
Okay, well, yeah, she mentioned that, slides, as they go.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the key to understanding this is, and I'm going to just use the example, for the last 3 years of a contract, the negotiated increase is 1.3%. It's the same amount in a percentage form each of 3 years with the same steps. The impact on the district each of those 3 years is not the same because of what you're asking, Greg, which is in a year that you have a higher number of retirees, the net impact to the district would be lower than an area when you had none. Okay.
I just know like a public person, they go, I mean, all you can see is like, oh yeah, okay, in 22, 23 in MA, fresh out of college is 67. And then go to the next year in MA, I assume there's that $2 to 70,000, see the 70 minus, you see that person's grade. So like, I think people see those percentages and it gets done using these contracts, that you can't take into factor like the new hires and like the people that making, you know, that 25 years hiring, you like that. No one's, it's kind of fun sometimes hard to centralize that piece.
Yep.
No doubt about it.
One other comment, just as you're talking about this, you know, our last levy was a 1.4%. Cindy, is that correct?
Yeah, CPI was 1.4, and then we had new property, which we brought it up to 1.7.
So when we were in negotiations, our point was that's what we were able to take in year one, and you know that's what we were starting with. But I can tell you that is challenging when in a real world environment, teachers are seeing inflation that's in the 8% and whatever value. And so we knew that we were going to have to exceed what we could take in the first year, but then, you know, it would have to work out over the remaining years.
I think, but at the same time, we have to realize as a school board, our biggest profit margin is the 5% levy. We're not like Google or GM where we can make more cars and we have 20 or 30% profit. So I think part of the whole thing is negotiation with whatever union that we're negotiating with. We have to make them realize that the most we can take in is 5%. And that's on the back of the taxpayers. That's not us selling extra cookies at the lunchroom. So I think moving forward, as we have these inflationary times, the realization has to come that there's only 5%.
And that point was made, you know, very clear and was, you know, critical to our negotiations.
I agree with Tom, that definitely was. That was very clear.
Anyone else, comments or questions on the new contract? And the, was the CPA was the other one that's still ongoing?
Yes.
no other questions, we can move on to 5C is the levy options and financial projections. Just in order of trying to get done on time and get through the whole agenda, maybe Cindy, if you can just kind of the highlights of the assumptions, especially what's changed from the last time we looked at the projections, and then talk through the levy piece.
Okay, so, basically what's, changed the highlight for us is usually our capital. And one of them has been the athletic fields that has been, I'm looking at the, slide system, the very first one. So at the top, where we said anything. Okay.
Is that the one you want me to share?
Yeah, that's good.
You want me to share it with the 5-year projection?
Yeah, to be clear for those people in the room, we're talking about page 21, 22.
22.
So the 5-year projection as of September.
There's two of them. For the
I'm gonna do the-
5-year projections,
You want the first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
this please.
No, that.
Oh, that's not the first. I get it. I got it. All right, let me go back.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what we did for this is really just a tool for you guys to use in tonight's discussion. This is something we use all the time, it's a 5-year projection. But as you get this discussion about the levy tonight, the one thing that we have on here is one is with taking the CPI at 5%. The second one is taking it at 0%. Lines, there's 3 lines that I would say that are important to look at. One is called the surplus deficit for core building maintenance. Going across, that tells you what is remaining after expenditures. And then the next one is called the total surplus deficit. That's under total expenditures. That tells you what we have left after capital items are in, and then the ending fund balance. So this is to help you guys dive through, like I said, as you discuss about the levy tonight. The second page is a chart that shows you where we are with our policy 420, where the 25% is for the red and the green is the 75%. And then after that, we just added a page that basically explained all about what our assumptions were going forward throughout the whole levy. So the second one that you see is just a 0%, exact same thing, except walking through, trying to give you guys a little bit of a picture to talk about the levy and maybe give us some feedback. That's what we're really looking for this group for.
Cindy, can you hit the bullet points at the end of the assumptions and just what has changed since we looked at it in the summer?
The stuff that the things that have basically changed a little bit since some that have done have to flip that. There's a decline in the property replacement tax. We just didn't expect we were going to see that as rapidly. So it was estimated to be around 3.5, it's estimated 2.5 by 2027. And investments will be larger than we first anticipated with the increases in the rates. And then we also have geothermal is a project that has been, the board has let us actually go out and take a look. They have approved to Jeff, they're maybe just go out to see what the bids would come in at. And then again, the capital 10-year maintenance plan expenditures have changed.
Are we done with project 1 yet?
No.
How much longer does that have to go?
That is going to go until 23, 24.
And then we're gonna start project 2 right after that or before that?
That's still undetermined.
The last items in project one are 20 classrooms that are designed to be renovated this summer. And they were first discussed at our board, those classrooms last Thursday, and they're slated to be up for approval next week.
And the pieces for project two that are in this line are simply preliminary design work.
Yeah. Schematic design, so it's just,
And once we get finished with the preliminary design, we'll have like a better, more specific scope. So that this thing doesn't run away like number one did.
And we've got a separate agenda item where Ron's gonna give us an update on the project two process. So we'll discuss that a little bit at the end. Does anyone have questions on the general financial projection assumptions? We have unaudited 2022 results. We have the feel for your timing of when the 2022 audit will be done. Is that something that we would want to come to this group when that's completed?
yeah, Brian's been working on that. I think we're pretty close to that being finished up, but I'll let him answer.
I have a question, Cindy, if I may. In terms of the CPI that's used, okay? Right now, the 5% was determined a while ago for 22, okay? We're right now in the window of the data that is used for 22, for 23. What is the span of that is used for the 23 CPI? What's the months?
Do you mean when do we receive the revenue from that?
No, when,
The CPI is determined on a calendar year basis. Is that your question?
I think December to December.
December,
Right.
December is when, CPI is December, every December.
So we have
Okay.
data through September. We have 3 more months of this calendar year to determine the CPI for the levy you'll adopt in December of 23.
so going back to the data set that you just showed, if you go to the assumptions, I would say, just for kicks, the assumptions.
Yeah.
I would say 3.5% for 2023. That's based on January 1st, 22 to December 31st, 2022.
Correct.
Yes,
And to say that that's going to turn out to be 3.5% when currently the current rolling 12 months is at 8.5%, correct?
yes.
So for that to be 3.5%, it would have to go to 0 for the next 3 months. So I think that number is understated, but just as a point of reference.
Yeah, year to date, I don't like to look at the 12-month rolling because you got things happening in last year that don't affect this year's CPI, but just looking at year to date, it's over 6%.
Yeah, it's like 6.2 or
I-
6.3 or something like that.
I think just the odds are pretty good we'll hit that 5% cap.
Yeah, okay. So I'm saying that number is probably low. Other than that, I don't. I guess one other point, because it was discussed and presented at the board meeting, and I think it might be in some of these materials, but and it relates to, I think, Cal's question. There was the last piece of project 2, which is the 20 classrooms were originally estimated. This is before the pandemic in this last 2 years, at a value that the new estimate, today's estimate is 55 or something percent, roughly 55 to 60% greater in cost than it was when the estimate was gathered 2 years ago. So
Yes.
we're seeing rather enormous cost increases in construction materials and construction work.
Quality gouging is what it's called.
Yeah,
The airports, they do it everywhere. It's
Yes.
municipality gouging.
okay.
let's do a quick rundown on the capital line. So that's project one, wrapping up the classrooms next summer. Project two is schematic design. Timeline to be discussed later. Geothermal is in here because a portion of it's in the budget for the current year, but the board has not yet made a decision on that.
Correct.
So that's $4.5 million there that's potentially not happening. The athletic field project is moving forward. That's impacting the next 2 fiscal years.
Actually, just real quick, that's in the exact same state technically as geothermal, in the sense that the boards, we're out to bid for that, but the bids have come in or they've been approved.
Okay.
One more thing, for project one, is more than just 20 classrooms for some 2023. We still have other classrooms, washrooms, and other items that's part of project one is still need to be completed. Yeah, that's all I think, approved.
Then we got the building maintenance line, which I think in the assumptions has been revised since we last looked at it, and then we've got the life safety as well. So those are all the different capital pieces. Just to get a quick recap, it's almost 50 million over the next 2 years, assuming it all goes forward. I guess what I was kind of looking at from the levy conversation standpoint is looking at the 23-24 school year, which the year would be affected by the levy decision here in the next couple of months. It is, how does that affect the revenue? How does it affect the fund balance percentage on that last line? But it's the 2 scenarios, 0 to 5%. It looks like it's almost a $6 million change in the property tax line item. The fund balance percentage only drops depending on if you're looking at percent of expenditures or revenues, the percentage points. But I guess I struggled with this in thinking about it, wearing a taxpayer hat and a school business official hat on this levy decision. And I think that's where a lot of districts are going to be over the next few months. Knowing that there's lots of costs that the district is incurring, not just the construction that has gone up a lot over the last few years, but energy costs are going crazy, transportation costs and other things have been really affected by inflation. But so as the community and the taxpayers. So it looks to me like the district could look at a scenario of less than the max CPI, and if the fund balance is, at least in the shorter term, would be okay. But I'd love to hear about people's thoughts on it.
I think you have to. You have to. There's a surplus. And everyone is raising their levy, even the park district. So, and they all have money too, but I mean, we're doing a lot of construction projects here, and we do have money in the bank, and we have to be a little responsible here and not max the levy. Did a great job with the teacher contract. We just got 1 more to go. So we're not giving out any 6% or 7% raises. So we're within the levy. So I think we just keep the levy piece kind of where we forecasted at before, and then just kind of let everything else work its way through. And then next year we have a better idea. Actually, at the end of the month, they're going to be repricing the next tranche of the I bonds. So that'll be a good idea of where CPI is going to be in December. So, I mean, we got like a couple of weeks before that comes out.
I did a little bit of quick math this afternoon. I only had a chance to do a Borough Park. It'd be slightly different from Borough Forest, but the district is roughly 25% of the tax bill for Borough Park taxpayer. It'd probably be a little higher percentage for Borough Forest because some of the municipal rates are lower there. So that helps give you a frame of reference of the impact of the district's decision on their levy.
Yeah, I'm in great scats. I'm looking at this other one. You got the 5, then you got the 0, and the 0 on the back of the fund balance. Even with the 0, yeah, the 0 is increasing. Yeah, that's not right. That even 0. So, I want to see it go to 0. Because, there's a whole once you take 0, It's just kind of balance a little bit. You have our 10 catching up,
Right.
like once that curve goes down, so.
Yeah, and you can see that when you look at multiple years, that it's not just a one-time drop, it impacts the revenue every year going forward. But it's in a manageable way, given all these assumptions and everything we're looking at here.
I'm at the same place, I'm just not comfortable with the impact on the taxpayer. I'm not comfortable with the impact that it will cause on the taxpayer. I just think there's no need.
Oh, you mean levy?
Levies.
Okay. It's like, well, that's.
Next agenda.
That's such
I don't know if looking for like a formal recommendation from the committee to the board on the levy or not.
Yeah.
Sounds like of the members here, we're pretty much in consensus to not levy to the max.
So do we have an idea like which you would recommend?
I think Cal mentioned like what's the prior, that was type 3.5.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what that.
3 in a book.
Like the
That's all
old,
right down.
the assumptions for CPI prior to 25, is that
Give or take, yeah, 'cause I think that's what Cal was talking about, like the older assumptions were like somewhere in there.
Yeah. 325, 350, something like that.
And then I think it's in the assumptions, you also forego the what do we call it, the recapture levy, right?
Oh,
That they add on for PTABs.
yeah, right, we spoke, yeah, we went,
I think you abated it in this first year.
Yeah. So continue that too.
Wasn't that,
Yeah, that's.
oh, maybe
that's
I
what we did last
misread.
year.
Oh, you're talking about loss and cost. Oh, yeah, and abate recapture levy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was in the assumptions.
Thanks for the board.
And also, so we don't get the loss of cost, so if that's not in the continuing, we'll have to take that.
Right. So it's a true increase of whatever CPI and property levy, not that plus the loss and cost. Any other comments or thoughts on the levy projections? I think the projections look great just from the standpoint of fiscal health. We've talked the last couple of meetings about cash flow and Cook County taxes, timing and all of that, and I'm still glad that we didn't jump in and say that top fund balance target can come down, because you're needing that. And the latest I've heard is tax bill due dates of the end of December, and so the earliest you might see that revenue is mid-December probably. So it's good to be in this strong financial position. There's lots of districts that are borrowing the next couple of months just to get by those late taxes. So we'll have to kind of see if this is a one-time thing or not. Also hearing that the February bills are going to get pushed back so that people have to pay it 2 months apart. So we'll have to keep an eye on that piece as it relates to fund balance targets and percentages and all of that going forward. But hopefully that'll stabilize. We can take another look at fund balance amounts. That brings us to the debt policy then, item 5D. We included a sample policy that the city put together, as well as just some background bond information from Chapman and Cutler, who does a lot of bond council work with school districts and municipalities. I just want to kind of talk through a couple of highlights and some things that jumped out at me. Hopefully everyone had a chance to kind of go through this in some detail before the meeting. But looking at the draft policy, one of the things that I highlighted was the sentence in the first paragraph, while the issuance of debt can be an appropriate method of financing capital projects, careful and consistent monitoring of such debt issuance is required to preserve the district's credit strength, budget, and financial flexibility. I think all three of those things are important pieces to it. And really, I think a lot of this policy sort of builds on that philosophy of balancing, maintaining good credit and financial flexibility and impact of debt on the operating budget. The next portion kind of ties this into the fund balance policy that I was just talking about, as well as the capital improvement program, which we seem to talk about at nearly every meeting, which is great because those really, especially, where the district has been with all of the capital dollars coming out of operating, potentially funding future things with debt, all three of those things really need to be in sync. Looking at some of the purposes and goals, again, I highlighted just maintaining the highest possible credit rating. The better the credit rating, the less the interest costs when the district does have to borrow. So that's an important piece from the taxpayer's perspective. When we get into section 3, the areas that I want us to discuss a little bit, the maturity of the debt and talking about that. The service structure and the impact on the operating budget, I think are all pieces that really intersect with what we're doing as a committee. And then it really gets into some of the process stuff in more detail than the current policy, which I really like. I think this is sort of the direction that I was hoping that we'd be able to go. I guess before I throw out anything else, does anybody have any specific questions or anything they want to highlight from this? Or Cindy, do you want to kind of talk about the process where you put this together?
We used one of the other schools that actually started writing this, and then once we were done with that, we incorporated it with ours, and then I worked with Elizabeth Tennessee to go over some. And then Steve and I read through it, and Dr. Johnson and I read through it. So going through this, it seemed like a very, a good plan, at least a good starting point for this district to have, a policy like this. It's pretty clear when we're talking through it.
That was weird. AAA credit rating.
Mhm.
What was the last time you had that? Oh, they don't, since you have an issue that
No, we haven't
it's
done.
been a while.
That was been a while now,
Yeah.
since last time.
Tom, did you have?
Yeah, I had one question. I had a comment. First of all, I do think that, I appreciate the work done on this, in pulling it this far. I think it's pretty comprehensive and covers, a lot of information that would be good guidance. The one question I had was this. Is there a need anywhere in section 1 to somewhat address what is covered under the maturity of the debt and more specifically, is one of our purposes or goals in debt to match our asset life with the funding and the financing of those assets. So does that need to be a purpose or a goal that then is addressed with your section 3A? That was my one ask. Do you understand my question?
Yeah.
I do, and I think that's a good
Yeah.
call out. I think that easily could be as under purpose and goals. I mean, we mentioned it right in the intro of debt is appropriate for financing capital projects, but then it doesn't really make that purpose and goals, but I think it easily could be. And
I mean, the concept is, and I mean, it's not only debt, it could be through a referendum or other thing, but the concept is that, ultimately the asset is being paid for by those who use it as best you can over time. We've gotten out of balance of that because of certain circumstances.
Right. There's really two pieces to it. One, it's matching a long-term asset, funding it with a long-term debt, but it's also matching that the users of the asset with spreading it out over people.
Okay,
from a repayment standpoint. I think that's a great point. One of the things that I wanted to talk about on the maturity of debt and the debt structure piece, wanted to see if anyone thought it made sense to put in some structure. So if you read through the Chapman color document, school district can issue bonds for up to 20 years. If it made sense in the policy to provide some restrictions on that, on either on certain types of debt or on debt in general, to provide more flexibility for future boards. I know like District 97, I don't know if it's in policy, but their practice with these borrowings has been only go 3 or 4 years out at a time, so that they aren't anti future boards. Something along those lines might be helpful. I know that I think when the district issued their 1998, I think it was bonds, they maxed out the DSEP for 20 years, and that kind of took away a lot of flexibility for a lot of them forward here.
Yeah, I would say, the DSEPs they issue in the past, they always stuck at 4 or 5 years. Even when like Elizabeth comes in presentations, it's 4 or 5 year paybacks, because otherwise you max it out, you can't use it, or in a situation arises like the roof collapses and you have to replace the $5 million roof, you don't have money, then you need to issue D7. Yes, that's like fix it, and it costs money.
And it's a little easier now that the D7 grows by CPI. You can layer in debt a little more easily than you could 10 or 12 years ago. But I think considering some kind of limitation along those lines might be helpful, as well as on any operating debt to just not knowing on the operating side. We talk a lot about the what ifs of the pension cost shift, or all those sorts of things that could dramatically impact the operating funds, but we laid out a 10-year debt certificate or something like that can become problematic too.
I think that's a good add.
So are we talking about a range for that limit for DSEP bonds, or you want to say we've set everything from 3 to 5 right here? Just said.
Yeah, I think a max.
What's your construction count? These things are for, right? To kind of help. So if you're gonna be done with, I don't agree with 20, because 20 ends up being refinanced, and there's gonna be all kinds of crazy stuff going on. I think in 90 we do 7 years. So I think the last time we've done it was, last time we done it was 18. But 3 to 4 is fine, but it'd be good to have it right around the construction thing, because that's like our main expense as to why we're doing this.
Right, you're working against that idea of matching the repayment to the life of the asset. The shorter you make those.
Right. So but I don't want to go long term, but 3 to 5 or 7 or something like that. Probably better.
Yeah, I think you need to make 10 potentially, but and maybe with the 10, like the longer you go, the smaller portion of your DSEP you use. So maybe you could use it all for 5 years, but to go on 10, you only use 50% of it, something like that. Greg or Tom, could you kind of tell us a little bit about how your policies work, and kind of, I think, your board policy committee. So what sort of recommendations we would need to pass this on to the next step?
So I think our policy committee, actually, the timing is pretty good for this year. It meets next week, and then we'll bring it to the board later for a first read. So what we have right here, process wise, we have a recommendation from this committee that, we like this with these few changes we've talked about thus far. We can, if we're comfortable, these are minor enough, where we could probably just make these changes, hold on, edit it up, and then just bring that to our policy committee for discussion before it eventually goes to board. It's a more complicated process than that. Unless this committee here thinks that they need to look at it again after some of these changes we're talking about are made. Is that your question?
Yes, that's kind of what I was looking for.
So, I mean, it could be a fairly swift turnaround. We don't have to sit and wait for a few months for this to go in front of the board. We could do it this semester for sure. So,
Does anyone have anything else they would want to include in either in the policy or at least in the conversation as we share information with the policy? I guess if we need a specific recommendation, let me throw one out and see what everybody else thinks. So with the DSEM, so non-referendum borrowing, let's under the service extension base, I would say out to a maximum of 10 years. But only using 50% of the available and up 5 years, using all of it. Is that give some flexibility to go longer, but also trying to provide flexibility to future boards and not max it out for 10 years. And then on the operating budget side, any borrowing to the operating funds, I would want to limit that probably 5 years, just keeping in mind the financial projections and that horizon we're looking at there. Any operating borrowing, I think should be shorter than that service extension.
Operating borrowing max of 5 years.
That feels right to me. Like we're talking about debt certificates as another avenue for borrowing that I would want to keep that shorter, just given that it's coming out of operating funds and other potential things that we end up competing with the district's financial position changed.
I don't think we should have to do debt certificates. We're in a surplus every year.
No, I'm not suggesting we do them, but in the policy, I would want to say if they were to do them, that there would be restrictions on them. You know?
Okay.
So if we're looking at the policy, section 3E, impact on operating budget has a piece, considering debt issuance, the potential impact of debt service and additional operating costs included by new projects on the operating budget, both short and long term, will be evaluated. And then that's where I would want to add something kind of saying, and borrowings from impacting operating budget would be to repay a period of 5 years or something. So that
pretty much, yeah. So what's your minimum if your max is 10 years? We should probably have both, right? Probably just.
Yeah, I mean, typically districts, it just doesn't make sense to do one. It's
I know, but
really short because of all of the cost of issuance. I don't know that I've ever seen a policy that had a minimum.
I mean, it's just a range or something, I think, but
But
just to
I
cover
guess
the base.
Yeah,
for
I'm
10
trying to think
years.
of a situation where you would want to do a really short one because I wouldn't want to make it 3 to 10 and have us hamstrung and realize we can't do something. I mean, I don't think there's a harm in allowing a 1 or 2 year. It's all of the rest of the policy talks about the process of working with the advisors and things like that. And so I think if you go through that process, you're going to realize, well, it doesn't make sense for us to do an 18-month borrowing because of all the cost of issuance that it entails. We could just pay for whatever it was.
I agree, I was just saying.
No, I appreciate that was something I hadn't thought of. I appreciate you bringing it up.
So,
Can you explain a little bit more when you were saying the 50% maximum? You were saying maximum term of 10 years, but
Yeah, so the way the debt service extension base works is that it's a maximum amount the district can levy each year. And do you know off the top of your head, City, what the number is currently? I forget. I don't have it.
She presented
Actually, I have it. Actually, it's not bad.
Just over 3 million currently.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
So let's say it's 3 million. It does index up by inflation, but for easy numbers, let's just say it's 3 million every year. So if we wanted to, you could do 5 years of $3 million payback. But if you went beyond the 5th year, you could only do $1.5 million in year 6 through 10 of bond repayment and bond levy. And I guess I would, with Cindy, like, you to ask Elizabeth what she thinks of that. There may be something from a structuring standpoint that I'm not thinking of, that might be problematic with that. I don't think there would be, but it would be good to bounce that up idea off of her too.
The one thing she did mention is gonna sometimes taking out your, what you want to do for debt at separate times. So you may take that out at one point in time for an interest rate, and then maybe 6 months later, you're gonna max it out, but you know, it may be beneficial to interest rates or timing.
Just market timing, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is a balance in terms of goals. One is we want to match the debt to the length of the asset, but what you've supplemented, Steve, is we don't want to have one board basically tie up the full debt, right? And incapacitate a future board from then being able to have any decision-making authority as it relates to debt. Is that kind of the balancing act I'm hearing?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So again, I think running that by advisors and getting any input, I'm just trying to understand what the downsides of, I understand the former, matching the asset life. I understand the intent and I'm supportive of the intent of not giving one board, that power, but I'm just trying to think through examples of when, what that would look like, in circumstances that might really warrant it, but I don't know.
I don't think it's really a matter of power. I think you're more or less handcuffed, right? You kind of turned it a little bit. Whereas, I mean, we're just trying to keep future boards from not being handcuffed with whatever is going on now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's not a matter of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is it power for the current board and for the, right, not allowing a future board to have no capabilities
Right.
to do anything because all the debt is occupied, right?
Right, exactly.
It makes sense, philosophically. I mean, that pertains to other decisions that boards make.
Right.
And whether it's in contracts or other things.
Right, I mean, it's similar to the fund balance policy where we don't want a board to spend all the fund balance down and leave the next board with
Correct.
untenable things.
Yeah, it's long-term thinking, which is good.
So Greg and Cindy, you feel like you've got some input to tweak what we have here, and then please reach out to me if there's anything I can do. Need one of us at that policy committee meeting, kind of try to make it work.
Yeah, that sounds good. I understand the language that we discussed on DSEP. That was also asked about. I think regarding debt reliant on operating funds, I don't know exactly where we left that. The minimum kind of maximum conversation, I don't know if I know where that exactly fell. Or the question is still ahead of the
minimum, I think, was broader than just the operating piece, if I understand.
Oh, I think it was, but there was a possibility thrown out, for DSEP that actually was viable, like you said. For debt, I think, let's try to get some advisement from, for operating funds, get advisement from others, from Hennessy, as you suggested, or I want to make sure we walk away from here with language that we can, put in place for our next meeting.
Yeah, I guess I was more looking for Elizabeth's input on the 50% of the D7 in the second 5 years.
Yep.
On the operating piece, I think a 5-year window for any kind of operating borrowing, just again doesn't hamstring future boards, given uncertainty of operating.
So we'll leave it with that. Okay, thanks.
Anything else on that? Then the last agenda item here in our last 10 minutes or so, I think we're turning it over to Ron, and he's going to talk a bit about where things are at. Project 2, give us an overview of the scope of it and update on kind of the timing as you see it now.
So the programming was done with the staff team, I should say, and the students. And that's complete. The schematic design is done, and they're finalizing the estimate of it so that we can have a presentation completed and done at the record board meeting coming up on the 22nd. As for the scope, is the athletic building, raising the athletic building, and remodeling to the full scope of the schematic design. I didn't plan on telling you every aspect of it because that'd be part of the presentation.
No, I understood.
Okay.
I guess my question when we talk about athletics, so it doesn't encompass the field house.
No.
Right? But is it both east and west sides?
No, so actually a good way that I've kind of explained this is that, I mean, to those of you who are familiar with that building. If you think about the main athletic hallway that runs east-west, right? If you walk in that door on your left-hand side, anything you see on the left-hand side is part of this project before the field house, right? So it's really that south east corner of the building, which is another way to describe that for those who know the place historically is that's actually the old original girls PE building and little additions around it.
All right. Any of this place on the historic register? Or all of this place on the historic register?
No.
Okay. Okay, go on. That's it? That's it?
I'm waiting for questions.
What G13 classified? You can tell us.
You what?
G13. It's a movie.
So next Thursday,
Yes.
meaning we'll have the architects will be there presenting their designs and
Estimated budget.
and an estimated budget. And then what's the timetable for the board deciding what to go forward? Or we not know that. I don't know why I'm looking at you. I'm looking at the camera and asking now. Where the board is at with the process.
There is a board goal here, so yeah, Tom, go ahead.
No,
Sounds
okay.
like you did, maybe.
I wasn't. The board goal is we're gonna get the information and we're gonna see what it looks like. Our goal is by in this school year, which means, to figure out how we're gonna what we're gonna do and then how we're gonna finance it. So, we're really kind of going at it inch by inch. And frankly, as we talk about it, it's kind of, there's a different segment to this. So that's project 2 just by itself. And then we've got this work that's being done on, I'm calling it sustainability efforts. It's labeled here as geothermal. But it's more than that, which we will also then need to assess how we need to finance that. But I think we got to wait and see what we get on, when is it? Next week, right?
Yeah, next Thursday.
Question for you, Cindy. Why on the project 2 line, not the geothermal, but the regular project 2 line, why is there so much money in next year for that if the schematics and everything are basically almost done and coming to the board next week? What's that additional $1.6 million that's in next year's projection?
So let's look at this one more. This is going to be for, you're talking about 23, 24 for project 2.
Right.
And that would also be part of the, if we're going to start anything or also to the, oh, sorry, I moved that off. So this is also part of the cost that there's going to be in architectural work and also to anything that would start with it at that point in time, the 1.6 million. Yeah.
But that hadn't been committed.
No,
Or not the geothermal.
Yes.
Okay.
The same with the geothermal. Hasn't been committed, but we have to put it into part of it in this year's budget. And this is something that we move forward, because that's also part of the athletic field at that point.
So, you know, I guess as it okay, I'm sorry, Steve.
Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, I guess as it relates to that, because one of the things that we've seen, and I don't know if the committee remembers, but, you know, we've reviewed prior 5-year projections, and, you know, there have been quite a range of what those projections look like, because in some we have capital, in some we don't have capital, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, I think in what we've viewed tonight, you've got some pieces of capital in that are, you know we've spent, but just to kind of understand what we're doing, I'm kind of asking the group, to me, we need to have a view of, one, based on what we know we've spent, two, based another version on what we think we might need to spend, just so that we can get different views. I know we've done that in the past, but you know, to me, the challenge is we've kind of moved from one end of the spectrum where we've put everything on in the projection model, and it looked like we were crashing, to a situation now where you say it looks like we have a surplus, but if we don't do project 2, Cindy, just as a point of reference, then we're going to have to do a bunch of other stuff in capital, correct?
Correct.
And so that number, you know, that number, that's not in here.
Correct.
So you know, this is watered down. We've scrubbed out and taken out everything under the premise that, you know, we will do project 2, but if we don't, or if it's delayed or whatever, then this is not an operating surplus as it's kind of named. We've just really scrubbed out everything that's capital. I don't know if I'm confusing folks.
I don't think we scrubbed out everything that's capital. What we scrubbed out is what could possibly be in.
What could be taken, could be removed if we do project 2,
Correct.
but we
That's
don't
the-
have project 2 in here. So it's kind of the,
Right.
Ron, the 10-year maintenance, remind us, because it's been several months since the board looked at that, and it's referenced here in the projections. The 10-year maintenance plan does remind us to what extent that includes any ongoing maintenance to the part of the building that would be raised and rebuilt for projects.
So we have overlap, and the overlap will be removed from the 10-year maintenance if project 2 goes forward. But if project 2 don't go forward, the overlap stays in there because of the need.
Yeah, so not only would the surpluses be affected, but the line items that we have listed for our capital expenditures, I'm not looking at a second, but those would need to be adjusted as well.
And then what's been happening is,
Say again?
what's been happening is we had the project, and then we got the capital expenditures, and then we had more stuff that we add on. And then that's why I come here every month asking why we spend more money, because we just don't know. I mean, I'm not saying
Until
it's missing, but we keep snowballing into all this stuff. That's why I keep asking for like scope and let's make sure we focus on it and things like that. Everybody who's involved in this athletic building, make sure they put their words in. I need the basket hung here or there, or wood floors right here or whatever, so that you guys don't come up and say, we're putting in 20 more classrooms. And everybody's wondering, why isn't project 1 done?
You want an all-in analysis.
I mean, everybody, it should be an all-in kind of analysis, because we're sitting here trying to figure out how to keep the money. But you keep spending it, and he's getting the bill, and he's giving it to her, and all of a sudden we just see it on here and we don't know what's going on. So that's what I'm saying is, if we had the scope, say, okay, they're here now. Okay, they're here now. Okay, they're here now. That's 20 million. Okay, that's 30 million. Okay, that's 70 million. Okay, it's cost 75, but we're still like right here, as opposed to, oh yeah, we added this on. Oh yeah, we added that on. Like, we don't know what you added on. And it gets approved at board meetings, but there's not that many people there. It's not in the paper. It's not in here. But we just keep seeing money, and we're like, where's the money going?
Yeah, I think there are two different capital conversations here that I think we should put on the agenda for a future meeting. One is the budget. When we set a budget, you know, do we make, when things come in more expensive, do we take things out to stay within the budget, or do we do everything that's in the project plan regardless of cost? And there's two different philosophies there. One is, as Cal described, you know, here's the project, we're gonna do it, and if it goes over, it goes over, but I'd like for us to kind of talk about it.
Right.
The other approach to that, the other piece that Tom raised, though, in the projections, I think we are getting a little off track of what's in the projections here, because we've got some things that haven't been approved that are in here. And then we have some things that haven't been approved that aren't in here, but we've already taken out the things that would need to be done if and when they are approved, and so there's some inconsistency on the capital side there that I'm a little worried about.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's specific.
We're about at our end time. Does anybody have any other questions for Ron or Greg or Tom about project 2? Hopefully you can attend or zoom into the meeting next week and get the updates on that. Otherwise, I'd like to just spend a minute talking about next meeting and what we want on that agenda.
You're gonna say all that stuff all over again, right?
But yeah, sure.
Okay, good.
I guess from a timing standpoint, we have a bit of a levy recommendation already, which is the next big sort of financial timeline thing in the fiscal year. I think the audit receipt would be kind of the next big thing, so maybe we won't schedule anything until we know better the time of it. Want to get the audit, but I think a review of the audit would be in order, and then I would like to then review sort of the capital budgeting / planning / projecting process. Does anybody have anything else to want to take up in the next couple months?
So is that all capital you want coming forward though? Just on the maintenance plan, health and safety, everything?
Well, I don't know that it's less about reviewing all the numbers and it's more about philosophy, how, I guess, how the district spends it, to Cal's point, and then how we're accounting for it in the projections. The other piece of when do we include something in here, and when one thing being in or out impacts a different line item, you know, how do we make sure that we're not double counting or not counting at all those overlap items that run stuff. I guess some of if we look at our charge real quick, you know, one of the other things a couple of things that are on there that we haven't gotten into yet. For future meetings, investment piece, we haven't really talked about that. In this committee's incarnation, we did in the previous incarnation that Greg and I were on a few years ago. With tax dollars finally coming in, it would probably be good if rates higher than they've been in a decade or more. It'd be probably good to get that on our radar. And then the other two pieces of the evidence-based funding model and the adequacy model, maybe visiting some of that stuff as well. Not necessarily in the next meeting, but in
Not adequacy at all.
Does the school invest in any short-term securities now or not?
Yeah, we're investing a little bit, some short term, what's basically done.
Is it
Well,
the 20 million we can't use? Is that invested?
that's invested, yes.
Okay. It's good.
Good question.
That's good.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything to put on the list? And so why don't we just wait for the administration to kind of let us know on timing of the audit, and then we can check calendars. It'd be good, I think, to have a meeting before the holidays, so in November, December, depending on the timing of the audit. Say receipts. If there's nothing further, I have a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second by Greg, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Colin.